Today is the feast of St. James, and the Gospel reading for today tells of how the mother of James and John asked Jesus for special consideration to be given to her two sons. Now, I'm sure that growing up, my daughters believed that there were training colleges for parents where we were instructed as to how to maximise the sense of embarrassment that we can inflict or impose upon our children. Here we learn the art of untimely displays of affection, of saying the wrong thing, and of wetting a handkerchief so as to rub off a mark or foreign object from the face of our child, something only parents seem to do. But perhaps there is nothing more embarrassing than a parent insisting that their child is shown special favour or is looked upon as special. Parents put an awful lot of pressure on their children, wanting them to succeed, wanting them to be the best. The Dean of Admissions at Harvard said that professionals in their 30s and 40s, physicians, lawyers, academics, business people and others, sometimes give the impression that they are the dazed survivors of some bewildering lifelong boot camp. Some say they ended up in their profession because of someone else's expectations. And more often than not, those expectations come from the parent. And in our gospel reading, we have just such a parent, a mother wanting the best for her children James and John. James and John were the sons of Zebedee. Zebedee, according to Mark, had hired men. He employed people. He was middle class. So his sons were, in the eyes of their mother, perhaps a cut above the rest. And should Jesus become king, then they would make excellent lieutenants sitting at his right and his left. But Jesus says to her and to her golden boys that they do not know what they are asking. For to serve at the right hand of Jesus means suffering and service and sacrifice. It means suffering. C.S. Lewis once said to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, he said, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But he says in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. God created us to be emotional, fragile, vulnerable human beings, and we're made to experience despair and hope, pain and relief, suffering and joy. And following Jesus amplifies those feelings. Relief and joy are more heartfelt. Pain and suffering are more profound. Mother Teresa once said that we must go on loving and giving until it hurts, the way Jesus did. And that is especially true for those of us who minister within the church. When I was training for ministry at Ridley Hall in Cambridge, a man called Hugo Duval was our principal. Hugo was an exceptional man. He was amazingly vulnerable and suffered greatly. If there was a conflict or tension in the college, then Hugo would internalise it and try and resolve it in himself before seeking to reconcile those who were at loggerheads. Under his costly leadership, the college enjoyed a degree of unity and fellowship that would otherwise have been denied it. Sadly, this vulnerable and painful way of holding a community together cost Hugo dearly, and he suffered from a nervous breakdown. By the time I arrived at Ridley Hall, Hugo had recovered and returned to work, but he remained a deeply vulnerable man. One day at our college communion, we had Simon Barrington Ward as our preacher, and Hugo was to preside at the Eucharist. Bishop Simon preached a powerful sermon on sacrifice and suffering and weakness, and it clearly struck a chord with Hugo. As the sermon came to an end, a pained and distressed-looking Hugo took to his feet. Waves of sympathy went out to him from the gathered congregation. He then took hold of the chalice. We held our heads in our hands. Hugo appeared to have lost where he was in the service. He then muttered, "Our Father," and we thought he was going to say the Lord's Prayer. Gasps of sorrow for him could be heard under people's breath. But he continued to speak, holding the chalice. "Our Father," he said, "if it is possible, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." We sat dumbstruck. We knew that receiving the chalice in that Eucharist and every Eucharist from then on would amount to saying that we were willing to drink from Christ's cup of suffering, that we were ready to suffer for his sake. Following Jesus means suffering, and it means service. Being a servant means that you view other people in a different way. You are there for them. Their needs take priority. Sometimes that means doing some very unglamorous jobs. Sometimes it means dropping everything so that you're available for others. Sometimes it just means being alongside someone in need. An old word for this being with someone is assistance, from the Latin adsisto, which means to stand with a person or to stand at a place. It is a very physical word. It means putting one's body somewhere, giving one's physical presence to someone. W.H. Vanston some years ago wrote, "The gift of one's physical presence is in a sense unique. It cannot be wholly or adequately replaced by any other gift or any other means of communication. Neither cards nor telephone calls nor television nor faxes nor the internet nor anything else in all technology can match the existential power of speaking and listening to another person, eye to eye, face to face. Our service of others is about being there with them and being there for them. And this is true of all of us, from the greatest to the least. Max de Prey once said that the first thing a leader does is to create a culture. The last thing a leader does is to say thank you. And in between, everything else is service. Service, suffering, and finally sacrifice. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 talks of dying on a daily basis. I die daily, he says. That constant dying to self is at the heart of what it means to be a disciple, to be a follower of Jesus. Christmas Evans, the celebrated missionary, said it's better to burn out than to rust out. Now that's not about crazy levels of activity. It's about sacrifice. And it's that sacrifice, that giving up of ourselves, that relinquishment of ourselves that is worthy of the Lord and fully pleasing to him. James and John, for all the ambition of their mother, would eventually learn that following Jesus meant embracing suffering and engaging in service and making sacrifices. For John, it was a long life of service. Tradition has it that he moved to Ephesus, and there he served the church, guiding, teaching, and of course writing. For James, following Jesus cost him his life. Luke tells us in Acts chapter 12 that King Herod laid violent hands upon some who belonged to the church, and that he had James, the brother of John, killed with the sword. Either way, the hallmarks of following Jesus are still suffering, service, and sacrifice. As Christians, we must go on loving and loving and giving the way that Jesus did. So maybe this simpler, humbler, more courageous Church of England that is emerging from the ashes of this pandemic, maybe this church will own and embrace its own vulnerability, that we'll give up trying to cling to such vestiges of power as still remain, that we will abandon all our all-consuming preoccupation with institutional survival, and that we will give ourselves instead to serving, to suffering if needs be, to giving our all in the service of our God and loving those to whom we are sent. It'll hurt as we share in one another's pain and as we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, as we mess up or are messed up by others. It will mean genuine, humble service, taking the lowliest place, doing the menial task, neither seeking nor receiving any reward, save that of knowing that we're doing God's will. And sacrifice, always sacrifice. Giving ourselves up to God, doing something beautiful for him. That must be true of all of us. It must define us as a church going forward. Amen.